stay out of the countryside. The extraordinary warning to a government minister. He's in charge of rural affairs, but this evening Alan Michael was told by the police to stay away from rural areas, such as the anger over the hunting ban. Also tonight, cat crisis. Production ends at Jaguar's historic home. Princely pledge. Harry promises to carry on his mother's work.
I always wanted to go to an A's country to carry on my mother's legacy as much as I can. I don't want to take over from, because I never will. I don't think anyone can.
And Europe on top on the opening day of the Ryder Cup.
And in the Midlands tonight, end of an era, union leaders begin the fight to save more than 1,000 jobs and over half a century of manufacturing at Jaguar in Coventry.
Hello, good evening. He was the man who came face to face with the protesters who stormed Parliament. Now Alan Michael, the Rural Affairs Minister, has been forced to abandon a trip to the countryside because of a warning from police. The Countryside Alliance, which leads the pro-hunting lobby, has threatened to demonstrate at a meeting of ramblers this weekend, which he was meant to attend. Chris Shipp is at the Department of Rural Affairs tonight. Chris.
It was a specific piece of police intelligence which led to tonight's extraordinary announcement from his department that the Rural Affairs Minister was calling off a visit to the countryside. He was meant to support ramblers in Derbyshire and Lancashire, but it's been cancelled on police advice. Alan Michael was meant to be championing the right to roam, but when Hunt supporters roamed into the Commons chamber this week and confronted him at the dispatch box, it all changed. It changed because the pro-Hunt campaigners have vowed to hunt down ministers wherever they go, and this weekend was no exception. Protests were planned at both the locations Alan Michael was due to visit. So he announced tonight he had reluctantly decided not to join the hundreds of ramblers. Those who had been under arrest for rambling into the Commons chamber were back hunting today. John Holliday may have been released from custody just hours before, yet at first light this morning he was back on his horse in Herefordshire. The 37-year-old was one of 8 men arrested after a stunt that's undermined security at the heart of British democracy.
I couldn't sleep at night and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't think I'd done the best to ensure that my children and grandchildren carry on doing what I've done and what my forebears have done.
The 8 Hunt protesters were released on police bail late last night. Dressed in plastic overalls, they included Otis Ferry, son of the rock star Brian, and Luke Tomlinson, the friend of Princes William and Harry. The 8 men had been held for more than 24 hours. And still many of them said they would do it again. David Redvers, back on his Gloucestershire farm today, warned the government the fight had only just begun.
Well, there were 40,000 people signed a hunting declaration saying that they were prepared to go to jail and break the law if need be. And 40,000 people is a lot of people.
And people the police were perhaps keen to keep away from the minister this weekend. Hunt supporters had called Wednesday's protest the first battle. They were preparing for a second this weekend, and a battle on their home turf. But now neither side will show. Already the Countryside Alliance is calling on the government to reflect why its Rural Affairs Minister isn't welcome in rural areas. Chris Shipp, ITV News, at the Department of Rural Affairs.
The invasion of the Commons by Hunt supporters on Wednesday was followed today by news of another serious breach of security. A Sun journalist not only carried a fake bomb into the House, he filmed himself doing it, prompting calls for a new Director of Security at Westminster. Here's our political correspondent, Angus Walker.
Undercover, undetected. This is Anthony France, working as a reporter, posing as a waiter. He's left a bitter taste in the mouths of those who are meant to protect our democracy. Detailed security checks failed to expose him. None of his references were checked. He told the employment agency he'd worked at 2 restaurants in Kent. They don't exist. Anyone who applies to work inside Parliament has to fill in a security clearance form that's checked by MI5. He used his real name, and yet it wasn't spotted. He's also registered as a reporter with Scotland Yard. He was given a parliamentary pass and was able to work just inches from ministers, MPs and VIPs. And yesterday, just a day after intruders broke into the Commons debating chamber, he smuggled in parts for a fake bomb. No one stopped him.
I managed to pass through security and nobody looked into my bag.
In fact, you don't need to be an intelligence officer to discover the truth about Anthony France. Anyone with a computer and a couple of minutes can work out that the man applying to work as a waiter in the House of Commons was in fact a reporter for The Sun. He'd already infiltrated Birmingham Airport as part of another Sun exposé. And yet the really chilling fact behind all the security failings this week is that MPs were warned 5 months ago by the boss of MI5 that there was clear intelligence of a threat from Al-Qaeda. Now they must be having nightmares, and ministers are furiously demanding police take control of the defence of Parliament.
Our main concern is that the centre of democracy and the leadership of the country should be protected.
But there's a clash with those who say extra security will spoil centuries of tradition.
There's going to be an enormous resistance on the part of MPs to have armed police in the chamber itself. They're already around the building, and we take the advice the police are given.
But while the rows are set to go on, the threats are still very real. Angus Walker, ITV News, Westminster.
For more than 50 years, it's been an icon of prestige British motoring, but today we were given a glimpse of the road ahead. Jaguar closed production at its main factory in Coventry. 1,100 workers lost their jobs, and a city lost its heart. The company, which is owned by Ford, blamed heavy losses. From Coventry, Geraint Vincent reports.
They've been making Jaguar cars at Browns Lane in Coventry for more than half a century. The 2,000-strong workforce is a community in itself, and the closing of the production lines here means that up to half of them will lose their jobs.
I won't say good morning because it clearly isn't a good morning. The announcement by Ford, the owners of Jaguar, to close the Brown Lane assembly plant and to sack over 600 workers at both Browns Lane and indeed Whitley is the start of what we believe to be the full closure of 2 more assembly plants in our country.
So after Coventry, what's left? Ford still has Jaguar plants in Birmingham and Liverpool, and it also owns the Land Rover assembly factory and 2 Aston Martin plants at Bloxham and Newport Pagnell. But the production of Ford cars is on the wane in Britain. It still makes the Transit van at Southampton, but the rest of its operations are now mainly engines. Diesel at Dagenham in Essex and petrol at Bridgend in Wales. From Ford Fiestas to Mondeos, most of the company's staple products are made offshore. Made in the UK, Jaguar is one of the ultimate British status symbols, and down the generations the company's produced one trend-setting model after another. They're a favourite among politicians. John Prescott was famously dubbed 2 Jags over his love for the car, and the Prime Minister is regularly to be seen in one. It's the first-rate design, the style and the elegance of these cars which make the Jaguar mark what it is. Jaguar's problem is that it's producing this kind of luxury inefficiently, and what's more, its main market, the United States, is drying up. The weak dollar has made Jaguars very expensive for the Americans, and the slump in sales has led to losses of hundreds of millions of pounds. Jaguar has had a more long-term problem with overcapacity. It's been running 3 factories here, producing a relatively small number of cars.
Now, the Premier Automotive Group, of course, which Jaguar is, of course, a part of, delivered a very disappointing performance in the second quarter, where we recorded a $362 million loss. Numbers like that speak for themselves and cannot be ignored.
There were fears that to cut the losses, Ford would cease Jaguar production in the UK completely. That hasn't happened, but Browns Lane has been sacrificed to make Jaguar a leaner, meaner cat. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Coventry.
The rebel leader of the Chechens today claimed responsibility for the Beslan school siege. Shamil Bazayev said he ordered the attack in southern Russia, in which 338 hostages, half of them children, were killed. And talks to end the deadlock over the peace process in Northern Ireland are entering a decisive final phase. The parties have until lunchtime tomorrow to agree a deal to end the standoff. A British man kidnapped by gunmen in Iraq was named today as Kenneth Bigley. The 62-year-old engineer went missing yesterday from his home in Baghdad along with 2 American colleagues. Today his family issued a statement calling for his release. At best, continuing violence. At worst, a full-scale civil war. That was the gloomy outlook of an intelligence report on Iraq prepared for President Bush. It came as the Defense Secretary here was pledging more troops, if needed, for Iraq's national elections. And there were signs, too, of the effect the fighting is having on the American election. From Washington, Robert Moore reports.
Another day in Baghdad, another horrifying and lethal car bomb. Almost certainly the work of insurgents, who appear increasingly emboldened. The attack reveals again the rapidly deteriorating security situation in Iraq.
Freedom is on the march.
Despite the violence, the president insists on telling Americans the situation is positive, a view that appears increasingly out of touch with the reality on the ground.
And national elections are scheduled in January. The world is changing for the better.
But contradicting that, US intelligence agencies have for months been warning the White House the outlook in Iraq could be disastrous. The intelligence estimate painted 3 scenarios. The best case is described as a situation of only tenuous stability. The second scenario is political fragmentation. The third, most serious possibility is nothing less than civil war.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended.
The president's critics have pounced, using this TV ad to suggest Mr. Bush has misled Americans about the security outlook in Iraq. Not surprisingly, John Kerry has also joined the attack.
He didn't tell you that with each passing day, we're seeing more chaos. He didn't tell you that with each passing month, stability and security seem further and farther away.
The chaos in Iraq continues to haunt the president's re-election campaign. The opinion polls here now paint a confusing picture. One poll puts the president in a dead heat. Another gives him a clear lead. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
There's much more to come here on the ITV News, including an African prince. Harry follows in his mother's footsteps. And a rider rout, Europe take charge in golf's most prestigious team event. That's all coming up after the break. Welcome back. It's a rare glimpse into the life of a young royal who, on his gap year break in southern Africa, became just a normal guy. In his first ever on-camera interview, Prince Harry told ITV News' Tom Bradby he plans to carry on Princess Diana's legacy. He said he wants to make his mother proud. This revealing insight is part of a documentary conceived and filmed by Tom to be shown on Sunday night.
This is Harry and the young boy who called him Prince. Mutsu is 4 and lost both his parents to AIDS. He hasn't got the faintest idea what being a prince means, but he loved Harry because he made time for him and he was good fun. He's wearing a pair of blue Wellington boots that Harry gave him and which he doesn't like taking off, even when he goes to bed.
Yeah, this is the welly. Does it look cool?
Like the other children at this orphanage, Mutsu is a victim of the AIDS crisis, which is consuming his country. There are more than 100,000 orphans here, and 3 more are created every hour. The adult population is literally fading away. Harry spent 2 months in Lesotho, and we joined him for the last 10 days, travelling with him around the country to make this documentary. Our film does show a very different side of him. He obviously has his mother's touch when it comes to children, and it was clear that he found being here an extraordinary experience. Harry was profoundly shocked to meet this 10-month-old baby girl who'd been raped by her stepfather.
By the stepfather.
Witch doctors tell men with AIDS they will be cleansed if they rape a young girl. In his first ever television interview, he talked frankly about his mother. He told me how it hurt to see her private life raked over again and again, and how he hoped she'd be pleased he was here.
But I always wanted to go to an ace country to carry on my mother's legacy as much as I can. I don't want to take over from, because I never will. I don't think anyone can. But I want to try and carry it on to make her proud.
Harry made this programme to try and assist Lesotho. A special fund has been set up with the Red Cross for anyone who wants to help. Harry does talk openly about his mother, but then he seemed to want to. He and his brother do get very worn down by the coverage of their mother's private life, and he seemed to relish the chance to get people to focus on all the positive things she did. Tom Bradby, ITV News, at Clarence House.
And you can see The Forgotten Kingdom, Prince Harry in Lesotho, here on ITV1 on Sunday night at 6:30. Michael Jackson came face to face today with the mother of the boy he's accused of molesting. Jackson, who denied 10 charges, arrived for the pre-trial hearing in Los Angeles dressed head to toe in white. The full trial is due to begin in January. Now with all of tonight's sport, including news of the opening day of one of golf's greatest events, here's Steve Scott.
Katie, thanks. Yes, the pressure at the 35th Ryder Cup was evident right from the start today when four of the biggest names in golf, including Tiger Woods, smashed their first shots well wide of the fairway, sending spectators scattering. But when the nerves settled, it was the holders, Europe, who dominated at Oakland Hills in Detroit, as Neil Henderson reports.
Some of the best players in the world are on show at the Ryder Cup this weekend, but some of them started like it was their first day on course. First, Colin Montgomerie hit the bunker. His partner, Irishman Padraig Harrington, was under pressure to perform. He found the sand too. Then came two major winners. First, Phil Mickelson was certainly no master when he hit his own fans. And Tiger couldn't see the wood for the trees with that shot. It was a dismal morning for the hosts. Monty had nerves of steel with his putting. The British players in the Europe team were on top form. Lee Westwood was supremely confident, and so were his fans. Tiger may have earned more money than the European team put together, but the world number 2 couldn't deliver. The American team might be the favourites at Oakland Hills, but Darren Clarke and Miguel Angel Jimenez performed as if they were on home soil. And they weren't the only ones. He's leaner, he's meaner, and Monty continued to prove a point to his critics with play like this. The hosts had to wait all day for their first full point, and it came from Jay Haas and Chris DeMarco after Jimenez came short with his putt. But Monty turned on the style again to secure yet another vital score, putting the Americans on the back foot. Neil Henderson, ITV News.
Bad weather today means England's cricketers will have to wait until tomorrow to wrap up their ICC Champions Trophy match against Sri Lanka at the Rose Bowl. Marcus Trescothick and Andrew Flintoff were still at the crease when rain stopped play. Trescothick passed his half-century, and England will resume in the morning on 118 for 3 with 18 overs remaining. The winners play Australia in the semi-finals. And 4,000 of the world's top disabled athletes are in Athens for the Paralympic Games. Britain's team will be aiming to match their tally of 131 medals at Sydney 4 years ago. And there's a full roundup of all the day's sport, including the Premiership SPL, tomorrow at 5:30.
Thanks, Steve. Now I'll have an update on our headlines and a look at some of tomorrow's front pages in just a few minutes. But first, let's go over to ITV Newsrooms around the UK.
Hello, I'm Yvonne Gaskill. Welcome to Central News in the East and West Midlands. More than 1,000 jobs are to go with the scaling down of Jaguar's Browns Lane plant. Steve Keeling has the details.
Yes, after days of speculation, we finally know what Ford intends for the Jaguar car company. And the facts are these. 1,150 jobs will go at Coventry's Browns Lane factory, the historic home of Jaguar cars. A further 425 jobs will come here to Castle Bromwich, where they'll work on the X range of Jaguars. 310 people, though, will remain at Browns Lane, where they'll be working on the wood veneers used in a range of Ford cars, including Aston Martin, Land Rover and Jaguar. And the site will remain the headquarters of Jaguar cars in Britain. Earlier, we spoke to the executives behind this plan, who didn't pull any punches at all as to why it's needed.
The harsh reality of the car business is that Jaguar is unprofitable, and we need to take decisive action now to ensure that the business has a future.
The costs outweigh the revenues, and pretty quickly you begin to move into loss. That's our present situation. That is not a basis for a sustainable future for Jaguar. We have to take action. I regret it very much at a professional and on a personal level. But I do know that if we do not take this action, the very future of Jaguar is under threat.
Trade union leaders representing the 2,000 workers at Browns Lane reacted to the company's statement with shock and anger.
We will be recommending to our membership that they oppose the proposals, that they fight the closure and fight back to save their jobs. The company have broken agreements with us that's been struck in good faith in recent times. They have had no consultation with us whatsoever, and that clearly couldn't happen in either the United States or indeed in Britain, and yet again it shows us that the labour laws in this country allow them to get away with these sort of things.
I think the redundancies are actually greater because there are some agency workers that aren't counted in the numbers, so we think actually in terms of job losses. So I suppose it's a bit ironic, isn't it, that we stand there with a picture of the aircraft that fought the Battle of Britain talking about another prestige British model in what might actually be a battle for the British, what's left of the British car industry.
Ford's plans are complex. Today, for example, they've also announced 300 new jobs at the Aston Martin factory at Gaydon in Warwickshire. Yet, at the same time, they've made it clear they're pulling out of Formula One at the end of this season.
But once upon a time, Jaguar was the cat with the sharpest claws in British motor manufacturing. The company started out building sidecars for motorbikes, but came into its own when it moved to Coventry to make sports cars. Eric McInnes has been looking back.
The Le Mans 24-hour sports car race is a real battle of nations this year.
Jaguar's heydays, racing heydays, were also Browns Lane's heydays. The factory was opened in the 1950s when the success of the racing C-Type and D-Type established Jag as the British sports car mark for the rest of the 20th century. But there were setbacks. The factory caught fire in 1957 and hundreds of brand new cars were destroyed. But by the 60s, a new Jaguar had captured the world's imagination, its greatest model, the E-Type. A decade later, the firm had been merged twice and nationalised, and Jaguar was producing the big luxury cars favoured by captains of industry and captains of the first 15. By the 80s, reliability had become a problem, and the US market, its biggest market, was losing patience. The company was denationalised and then bought by Ford in 1988. Even then, there were fears about joining a global firm.
There's a real risk that they will start to manufacture a Jaguar outside of this country. This will cheat British workers out of jobs.
And yet the 90s were a decade of revival under Ford. The XK8 and XKR were a return to their swoon-mobile heritage. Then the retro-styled S-Type, a big seller in the US and Europe, added to success. But then perhaps the step too far, the entry-level X-Type. Was it a Ford Mondeo in a Jaguar jacket? And so 50 years after Jaguar emerged as a world force, manufacturing in Coventry will end. One consolation, the cars will still be made in Britain, at least for now.
In other news, a second person's died in an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in Redditch. The woman in her 60s died at the town's Alexandra Hospital. Another woman died earlier this week. Public health officials are still trying to trace the source of the outbreak. An investigation's underway after a man's body was found in a blazing pub in Shropshire. Firefighters made the discovery after being called to the Sudeley Arms at Sudeley near Market Drayton in the early hours of this morning. The alarm was raised by a passer-by who spotted flames coming from the roof. A £25,000 reward is being offered to catch the killer of a man found shot dead on a grass verge. The body of Kevin Means from Jamaica was discovered in Pattingham near Wolverhampton 2 years ago. Police have been stopping motorists near the scene. Despite numerous arrests, no one has been charged with murder. Well, now for the latest weather forecast, here's James Wright.
Central weather with BMIBaby.com.
Hello again, good evening. If you're looking for sun this weekend, you might as well sleep through tomorrow because I'm afraid we've got some more wet weather on the way. But we've got a dry night tonight. A bit of cloud out to the west. It's starting to break up, in fact, but that'll be filled in by some mist and fog patches. Not a cold night, though, 13 to 16 Celsius. Then tomorrow morning, I'm afraid a cloudy start for most of us. A band of showery rain, quite heavy in places, sweeping in from the west. By the afternoon, that would have edged further southeast there, just starting to dry out and brighten up from the west. You've got a temperature tomorrow of 18 or 19 Celsius, so not feeling too bad. And on Sunday, we could see some wall-to-wall sunshine for a while. Certainly drier, if a little bit cooler. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Central weather with BeAreMyBaby.com, the airline with tiny fares.
That's it. Apologies to our viewers in the East Midlands where they're experiencing technical difficulties. Now, though, let's rejoin Katie Derham for the rest of the ITV News. Good night.
Welcome back. A reminder now of tonight's top stories. The Rural Affairs Minister Alan Michael has been forced to cancel an official trip to the countryside this weekend following a warning from police. Ford has announced the closure of Jaguar's main factory in Coventry today with the loss of 1,100 jobs. And Prince Harry has given his first on-camera interview. He said he wants to carry on the charity work of his mother. Time now for a look at the front pages of some of tomorrow's newspapers. And the Daily Telegraph reports how the Prime Minister was warned by Jack Straw a year before the invasion of Iraq that there could be serious problems after it. Iraq also dominates the front page of the Times with news that Britain may send more troops to the country ahead of national elections in January. It has a picture of Tiger Woods at the start of the Ryder Cup. Europe's great start to golf's most prestigious team event also dominates the front page of The Guardian. The picture is of Colin Montgomery. And the Daily Mail leads with the headline, "It was child's play." The quote comes from Otis Ferry, son of the singer Brian Ferry, who was one of the huntsmen who invaded the House of Commons. And that is the news tonight. Coming up over on the ITV News channel, a look ahead to a packed weekend of Premiership action, including a Birmingham return for Robbie Savage. But from me now and from all the team here at ITV, good night.
ITV National Weather, sponsored by Powergen.
Hello, good evening. So a breezy weekend all round, really the strongest of those winds up across Scotland, as you can see as well. Rain at times, but hopefully further south we should see some good sunshine. As far as tonight goes, this deep low pressure, that's going to bring gales into the far north, whilst at the same time more wet and windy weather arriving into the far north and west. But as you can see, generally mild everywhere. So tomorrow morning, a bit of a wet and a windy start really down this main spine of the country. That rain now should edge away by the afternoon, really leaving us with a mix of sunshine and showers, the most heavy and blustery of those showers up across Scotland. Cool start come Sunday morning. For many of us, sunshine and dry, but later on, rain and gales for the far northwest. Bye-bye.
Positive energy from Powergen.